have plateaued now. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming today. This is the last in our series of the Teachers and Advisors webinar series from St John's College, and I'm really pleased to be joined by Richard to deliver the session today. And we look forward to your questions as well, so do put them in the Q&A box during the course of the session. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you, Elsie. That's really great. Welcome, everyone. Great to see you all here. So just to introduce myself very briefly, I'm the college's senior tutor. That's the academic who's responsible for all students and their education and their welfare and ultimately their admission. And by trade, I'm an historian, so I teach history in the University of Cambridge. But I've been responsible for admissions for students in every subject for well over 20 years. So I hope that what I have to say here is useful. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see a presentation that I've written for today. So just bear with me while I do that. That's the one we want. That's the one we want, I think. Yeah, great. So I hope you can all see that all right. Does that look okay to you, Elsie? Great. Okay. So everyone, let's kick off with, and I've written this bearing in mind that there may be people on the call for whom supporting applicants to Cambridge is a relatively new business. So those of you who are very experienced, do forgive me if I talk over some issues that you're already well aware of. I'm going to start off by, there we are. Has that moved okay? Fine, it's all working all right, that's good. Phew. I'm going to start off talking briefly about what Cambridge offers. I think the critical thing to emphasise here is that Cambridge is a collegiate university. It's made up of 31 individual colleges, 29 of which admit undergraduates. And for students, the college of which they're a member is their home. They live in their college, and it's also the centre of their studies in all sorts of ways. It's critically centre of their studies because of the way that Cambridge teaches. The unique way in which we teach is supervision. That's very small group teaching, 2-to-1, 3-to-1, sometimes 1-to-1, in every module or optional paper that a student is taking from the very beginning of the course to the very end on a weekly basis. So the format depends a bit on your subject. In the sciences, it tends to be based around worksheets. In the arts and humanities, it tends to be based around reading and essay writing. But in every case, every week, students complete work that's been set by their supervisor, one of the professors, typically, hand that work in. The work is marked overnight, and then they meet the following day for their supervision, in which they get detailed feedback and more insight into the work that they've done and the topic area that's being covered. Quite often interfacing with the lectures, with the way that the course is unfolding, but sometimes standing a little bit independent of that too. And for most students, the critical experience that they have at Cambridge is of being supervised, of having this very individualized access to the professors right from the very beginning and very individualized feedback. And that fundamentally is what Cambridge is about. The courses are exciting, they're challenging. Cambridge is, in international terms, one of the leading research universities, and we try and make sure that our courses are inspired by cutting-edge research. They are underpinned by excellent academic facilities. There are 150 libraries in Cambridge, for example, wonderful laboratory facilities, but also by very good social facilities, some of them at university level, but many of them at college level. And it's that collegiate structure, again, that's important. And within the college, people are in interdisciplinary groups. I'm going to say a bit more about colleges in a few moments. And that means that they are surrounded by a diversity of academic interest and experience. And because this is an international university, they're also characteristically surrounded by people from all sorts of backgrounds all over the world. The costs are manageable. We have very good value college accommodation compared with many other universities. Our accommodation structure is very positive for students. We have exceptional library and IT provision, and Cambridge is a very compact place in which transport costs are absolutely minimal. In most cases, it's shoe leather or a bike, and actually you can manage without a bike perfectly well, though most people do cycle. I think it's worth emphasising that Cambridge also offers, in every subject that we teach, excellent career opportunities, because we provide a wonderful education full of generic skill building and confidence building. And realistically, Cambridge is perhaps the most sought after brand among graduate recruiters in the world. So we really stress that opportunities are available in every subject, because one of the things that we really look for in students is subject interest, and I'm going to dwell on that in a few moments. But first, I just want to talk briefly about the process of applying for those of you who are new. So an early application deadline through UCAS, the UK University Application System, of 15th of October. That's much earlier than for most universities. And when students apply, they're then asked to fill in a questionnaire. They get an email in response to their application. That provides us with a bit more information. Where we use pre-interview tests as part of assessment, and that's broadly speaking in our most heavily applied to subjects, that's the sciences, plus economics and law. Where there is such a test, students need to pre-register, and they have to do that themselves. And there is information on tests on the subject pages of our website. I'm going to say a bit more about tests in a few moments, but early application deadline of 15th of October, questionnaire to fill in. Hopefully students in the relevant subjects will have already pre-registered for their admissions test, and actually in many cases will already have completed it. And then on the basis of the paper application, and for the most heavily applied for subjects, the tests, we select people for interview, and we interview about 65% of the field. And we take the interviews take place usually in very late November or early December, but December is when most of the interviews are. We make decisions by mid-January, so there's quite a gap between the interviews and final decisions, and that's because we move applications around internally as we seek to compare different applicants in the same subject in different colleges. And that's one of the reasons why college choice at application does not matter. This is something that people often ask about. It's a collegiate university, you're in a college. Which college you're in must make a really big difference. Actually, it doesn't, and for a range of reasons. Firstly, colleges don't specialise in particular subjects. We pretty much all teach pretty much all of Cambridge's subjects. So there are one or two smaller subjects that some colleges don't offer, but pretty much everyone offers almost everything. And some colleges, like my own college, St John's, do offer everything, literally everything. And students in different colleges can complete the same course, they sit the same exams, they have access to the same or very similar teaching. So lectures, seminars, laboratories, all provided by the university, exams provided by the university, the course content set by the university. And the only thing that is organised and provided by the colleges is the supervision, the small group teaching. But depending on your subject and depending on the degree of specialisation of the options that you're taking, you're very likely to be supervised outside your college anyway, because we send you right around the university to get the most expert teaching. At the moment, I'm doing quite a lot of teaching, supervision teaching, as well as lecturing in the faculty, but I happen to be teaching no students at all from St John's College. All the people that I'm teaching right now are students in other colleges, because the particular specialisms that they're taking, in which I'm one of the most expert people. So college choice really doesn't matter from an academic perspective. And it doesn't matter from an assessment or application perspective either, because when we assess applications on a college by college basis, we're assessing them on behalf of the entire university, not just for ourselves. And we redistribute applications internally once we've made that assessment. And the sum outcome of this is that around 20% of successful candidates are admitted to a college that they didn't originally choose. And that high percentage makes it statistically irrelevant, essentially, which college you apply to. Your chance of getting into the university is virtually identical, irrespective of college choice. And finally, while the colleges do vary in terms of size, in terms of location, though it's location within a small frame, because Cambridge is a small place, and no college is more than about 10 minutes bike ride from the centre of town. They vary in architectural style, but in other ways, they're extremely similar to one another. And even big differences in size and architectural style make almost no difference to the sum total of student experience. So we always say to people, don't worry about college choice. What do we look for in our students? I mentioned earlier that we look for genuine subject interest, and that's really important, because from the beginning, we're trying to admit students are going to spend 3-4 years doing a particular degree course, which we hope that they will really enjoy and thrive on. And critical to that is liking your subject. So your subject being something that you chose, the student chose, rather than something that their parents chose for them, is fundamental, as is a good fit between a student's interest and aptitude and their chosen course. So what do we mean by that? We really mean that not only have they chosen something that they really like, but they've also chosen something that they're likely to be good at. And to a degree, that's something that you can help them with in advising them. You can get them to think about the skill set, their knowledge set, as well as their interest in a subject. And the best situation is one in which the student chooses a subject that they really enjoy, but which you, their subject teachers in key subjects, agree is also something in which they're likely to do very well because they have the right skill set, the right knowledge set. And it's very easy to identify the components that make up the right set simply by looking at our website, looking at our subject pages. We'll make it very clear, for example, in our economics pages, that doing well in economics at Cambridge is not just a matter of being interested in economics, it's also a matter of being very good at mathematics, because it's a very mathematical course. So thinking about those things, getting students to think about those things in a really discriminating way is very, very helpful. When we're talking to students about what we're looking for in them, we always say we want you to be among the most able and committed students in school or college, the hardest working, the people who are most serious about their chosen subjects for university study. And that's usually manifested in a strong performance in examinations. So they're students who are on a trajectory to be placed at the top of their cohort. They're people whose final year grades are likely to exceed our typical offers. And I'll talk you through that in a moment or two. Beyond those, rather clear and obvious things, you think they are really good. They are really good and they get really good exam results. We're looking for people who have the ability to think critically and learn independently, who work hard. And the average Cambridge student works for about 45 hours per week. That includes lectures, seminars, supervisions, as well as personal study. We're looking for good core knowledge and technical fluency in assessment, especially in the sciences when we're assessing students for entry. And most of the people who get in and do well with us have a natural curiosity. They're people who are interested in how the world works, in why things are the way they are, in how they might be different. And in a small number of subjects, we're looking for a student to have a strong vocational commitment, by which we mean a commitment to the subject that they are studying as a profession. And that really applies only to medicine, veterinary medicine, and architecture. Even engineering and law, which are also vocational subjects, are subjects where actually a vocational commitment is not a prerequisite of application. It pretty much is for medicine and vet and architecture. But law and engineering can be studied by students in a really quite academic way. And not everybody who reads those subjects goes on to have careers in those fields. So when we look at an application, we're looking at the obvious things and we make an holistic academic judgment. So we weigh up everything together and we try and pull out the people who we think are academically the strongest. We look at public exams. We look at your student's UCAS reference. We look at a student's personal statement. We use contextual data to understand the application better and place it within a context that is fairer to its assessment. In our most heavily applied to subjects, we use admissions tests. For arts and humanities subjects, we often ask you to send in, students to send in samples of written work. And finally, for people who are called for interview, we factor in performance at interview. And when we make our final decisions, we look at all of those things together. It's not the case that you get through the upper bullet points to get to interview and then interview is the decider. And I'll explain why that is not the case again in a few minutes. But it's all of that together. One thing I want to stress is that candidates who are successful are rarely very strong in all of these areas. So most of the successful candidates are strong in most of these areas, but not every single one of them. What percentage of applicants to Cambridge are essentially scoring full marks in all of these areas? About 1%. And we take about 20%. So 95% of the people who we accept are not perfect. Thank goodness. Results in examinations. One thing that I think I want to stress here, and I'm giving you a range of the most commonly seen final terminal examinations on which we offer. One of the things that I want to emphasize here is that we have really good sense of comparative standards right across the international field of presented qualifications. And that we have very good access to advice about application systems we've not come across before. So there's a central unit in the university that provides this. First, a little bit about the balance between GCSE and A-level or equivalent in our selection. We do look at GCSEs, but it's really important to recognise that when we look at them, we apply contextual data to them to understand them better. In other words, we are really looking to identify through GCSE whether someone was at age 16 in the top group in their cohort, in their school, or not. And GCSE results can be very different between two candidates, primarily because they went to different schools. So we want to see a good set of results for the school, not necessarily a good set of results in absolutely complete terms. There are students with 12 grade 9s at GCSE who are no better than students with 5 grade 9s at GCSE in a very different educational setting. We know that, and we take that very strongly into account. Overall, GCSEs or equivalent are less important than final grades, than A-levels or equivalent. And it's also worth stressing, I think, that where people haven't completed GCSEs, and in some subjects for entry, this can be 50% of the application field, we have another way of getting at what they were like when they were 16, which is that we ask for transcripts showing their academic profile at age 16, age 15. And again, we're looking for the same sort of thing that we're looking for with GCSEs, not some absolute mark, but a sense that in their cohort, they were doing well relative to other students. Typical offers, I've given you a series of typical offers here. You can see that for A-level, we tend to operate a range of typical offers. Likewise for IB. For other examination systems, maybe it's a little bit more precise, though a range is generally the thing that we tend to cite. I think the thing to emphasize here is that if you look at the lower end of that range, the vast majority of people who are getting in will be exceeding those scores. So if our typical offer in arts and humanities in a subject like mine, like history or in English, is A star, AA at A level, at least 2/3 of the candidates getting in will have 2 A stars and an A at A level or better. In the sciences, it's even more stark. The standard offer is 2 A stars and an A, and almost 100% of the people get 3 or 4 A stars. So that's the level of the competition. So the standard offer is really a kind of embarkation point for an application being credible rather than the absolute standard of entry. References are really important to us when we assess applications. And I think it's probably fair to say that, if I'm speaking personally, I would say that the single element in an application that I find most useful is the reference from the teacher. So thank you in advance, everyone, for the references that you provide. They're critical to our understanding how able applicants are and how much potential that they have. What we tend to find really useful is comparative and metrical information. References that help us distinguish between students who are really exceptional, by which we might mean the top 5% of people applying, and who are merely very good, by which we mean basically the top 50% of people who are applying. And we want to make sure that we're taking all of the exceptional people and lots of the very good people, but we don't want to miss out on the exceptional. So I've given you some examples here of the sorts of things that we tend to see in references these days, which we find really useful. In tests at the end of year 12, Neha was ranked 2nd out of 23 students in physics. She's in the top 10%. She's got very good results at the end of year 12. She's clearly on a good track. Our head of geography rates Jack among the top 3 students he has taught in his 25-year career. So it's the head of geography. He's clearly a senior and experienced teacher. He's been teaching for 25 years, and he really thinks this person, Jack, is outstanding. Again, very helpful for us to know that. It's much less likely that we will accidentally overlook Jack in a process that inevitably has moments in it where luck can be involved. I mean, any process does. We're alert to Jack right from the very beginning. In her 3 A-level subjects, we rank Emily 1st out of 25 students in economics, 2nd out of 23 in history, and 9 out of 31 in maths. very fine information that enables us to think really carefully about Emily's ability. If she's applying for history with a rank first in economics, second in history, and ninth in maths, we're going to look at that profile and think that's a very strong profile. Conversely, if she's applying for economics, even though she's ranked first out of 25 students in economics, because economics is a highly mathematical subject at Cambridge, we will notice the 9th out of 31, top third, but not top 20 or 10 or 5%. And that might mean that at interview, we're particularly focused upon checking out her mathematical ability to ensure that she's going to be able to cope with our course. Mo has attained the highest grades on most of his biology essays this year. He's among the top 3 students in a strong cohort. So Mohammed, clearly a very good student. The cohort is well rated, but he's attaining the highest grades on most of his biology essays this year, and it's the highest grades plural. So that probably means A stars or A's rather than just A stars. And that might make us again say, we just need to do a little bit of checking here. He's clearly a very strong student overall. Is he quite as strong in biology as he is in perhaps 1 or 2 of his other subjects? So it enables us to focus for interview in a helpful way. And then finally, a really helpful example, I think, in terms of things we find useful. Although Sophie is naturally reserved and less voluble in lessons than some students, her written work is exceptional, fluent, clear, incisive, extremely well informed, and relentlessly focused on the question. What this tells us is that Sophie might be a bit quiet at interview, but the thing that Sophie is really good at is producing on the page. And of course, that's how we assess students at university. So again, provides us context, but also provides us with a very strong steer. Students' personal statements, perhaps less important for us than for many universities, because we interview about 2/3 of the applicants and we get to meet them then and get a sense of them. Quite often we use personal statements as a starting point for interviews, and so it's very important that students write with integrity, that they tell us about their interest in the course, but they also tell us a little bit about the relevant subjects they've studied, and then quickly get into demonstrating what we call supercurricular exploration. That is, exploration of the subject outside the school curriculum. And this is where we get a sense of how interested people really are. How much wider reading are they doing? For arts and humanities subjects, that's mostly going to be about books and articles. But for other subjects, for the sciences perhaps, it might be more common for us to see people who are watching online lectures or attending TED Talks, doing MOOCs, who are participating in things like Olympiads, maths perhaps, or chemistry, physics, biology, informatics. And maybe they're accessing learning in other ways, perhaps if they're very interested in drama as part of English literature. They might be watching plays in the theatre but on TV, or listening to them on the radio. They might be making site visits in a subject like archaeology, all sorts of ways of exploring. But the students who stand out are the ones who are going beyond the curricula. And one of the things that you can do that will be most helpful is to reinforce that message and to provide students with perhaps some suggestions about the sorts of ways into wider exploration that they might pursue. We're sometimes asked about relevant work experience. It's hard to get work experience these days, and it's much less important than people tend to think. So if your students are getting really stressed about not having work experience, please try to depressurize that situation. That's a really helpful thing for you to do. We want students to reflect analytically on their exploration. So again, encouraging them not just to read, but to think about what they're reading, and in their personal statements, to give of themselves, to describe their reactions to the exploration that they've done, because that will produce a unique personal statement, genuinely unique, in a way that, pulling pertinent quotes off the internet is not going to, because people all pull off the same quotes. What we really want is not somebody who tells us how keen they are, how interested they are, how committed they are, but somebody who shows us by simply telling us what they've done, and shows us how bright they are by reflecting on what they've done. And remember that not all of that reflection is going to be positive necessarily. And forgive that interruption as my phone rang in the background. I should have had it on silent. Okay, so I'm going to move on now to talking a little bit about admissions tests. We're introducing new admissions tests in 2024 in partnership with Pearson VUE, but they're based on tests that used before. And essentially, we've got a more compact portfolio of tests sat in a slightly different way. A combined test of science and engineering for engineering and natural sciences, a maths test for computer science and economics, very similar to the one that we've set before. We're moving to use the UCAT for medicine, having previously used the BMAT, and we're using the LNAT, the National Law Test for law. You'll need to pre-register for students need to pre-register for tests, and they'll all be taken in an approved test centre. In the case of the UK, that's mostly going to be in driving test centres. So pre-registration will mostly be, I think, in late August, September, and test sitting probably from mid-September through until early October. But key and up-to-date information and example papers will be available via our website in due course. There will be subject information available, which will connect to the tests if you look in the right places on Cambridge University website. Students need to pre-register, which I think I've already mentioned a couple of times, but that's only for tests that are used in advance of shortlisting. There may be some tests that we get people to sit online pretty much at time of interview, but again, there will be information on this on the website in due course. And if there are tests at time of interview, pre-registration won't be necessary. It's only for these early tests that you need to pre-register. What do students need to do? Advise them to practice against the clock using the sample papers. Why against the clock? Because the biggest problem that people have with the test is that they run out of time. So working against the clock is really important. And for the technical subjects, that's the sciences, computer science, economics, natural sciences, engineering, medicine, it's really helpful, I think, to revise technical content. So your A-level course thus far, or equivalent. A bit about interviews now, and I'm saying more about interviews than about other things, not because they're more important, but because there are more questions about them, typically. The starting point for all of this is to say we shouldn't really call interviews interviews. We should call them interactive aptitude tests, because that's what they are. The word interview gives us a slightly misleading impression, I think, of what's involved here. It's not about the person, it's not about fit, it's about the academic ability. And so to get at that, we will put students through a series of exploratory questions, either technical questions on paper or on the screen, or questions via discussion, but all essentially doing the same thing of exploring their aptitude for the subject. Typically, students will have either a couple of interviews of about 25 minutes each, or one longer interview of maybe 45 minutes. But in every case, the interviews are conducted by subject specialists. So you'll be interviewed by the professors and as a candidate, that is, and they will talk to students about the subject. That's all that we talk about. Are the interviews going to be online or in person? Well, last year, most colleges interviewed online, and I would expect that to happen again this year. But there were some colleges that were in person, and I would expect those colleges to continue in person in the coming year. There might be some shifts at the margins, but again, the website will tell you. And whether the interviews are online or in person, they're essentially all the same. They're doing the same thing in the same sort of way. I did face-to-face interviews for years. I've interviewed more recently online. I think there's almost no difference. I have a personal preference for online because I think students are a little bit less nervous when you interview them online than they can be when they've travelled to Cambridge and they're in a strange place, surrounded by strange people. But it makes very little difference. All the time, we base our interviews around problem-solving scenarios and discussion. The nature of the scenario, the nature of the discussion will be dependent upon the subject. And in every case, we're seeking to assess students' subject interest, their core knowledge, their technical aptitude. And in every subject, we are looking for logical reasoning and intellectual flexibility, by which we mean the student's capacity to take on board new information and incorporate it into the model with which they're already working. There's no hidden agenda. There are no trick questions. We want people to do well. If we're playing devil's advocate, we'll tell them that we're playing devil's advocate. It's a very straightforward business. I think one way in which the interviews do obviously differ is format around how technical they are. engineering, physics, chemistry, mathematics, computing. The interviews are going to be very substantially a set of technical exercises. And in the sciences that are more maths focused, there will be mathematics, probably a surprising amount of mathematics. Conversely, they're much less likely to involve students being asked about their personal statement. In a subject like mathematics, we can have a standard set of questions that we ask absolutely everyone. Sometimes students come out and say, well, why didn't they ask me about their personal statement? And the answer is, well, because they didn't need to. They were able to make an assessment of your ability simply by going through technical problems with you. In the arts and humanities, we'll try and work with your subject content from A-level or equivalent, but we're more likely to draw on a personal statement to discuss matters with you because you'll have talked about what you've been reading. And I flesh that out a little bit here. I suppose it's in the social sciences that we are most likely to talk to you about wider subject awareness. If you're applying for economics or politics, HSPS, and you've got no sense of what's been going on in the national or world economy, or no sense of what's been going on in respect of populism and the like in politics, we would wonder a little bit about how interested you were. Finally, at interview, we quite often use what we call prompt material, which is material that students have never seen before, but on which we can base a set of questions. Usually a data set in the sciences, or in the arts and humanities, a passage of writing. And we need the students to focus just on the thing in front of them. They don't need to bring any additional information with them. They can do it all from just reading what's in front of them, looking at what's in front of them, and drawing logical conclusions. Interviews always involve us getting students to think about things in new ways, existing knowledge, but maybe seen with a different perspective. The interviewers will very frequently need to intervene to guide and prompt the candidates, to keep the interview moving, to suggest new routes forward, or perhaps point out where they've made an error and point out where they could take a different tack. It's very common for candidates to need to ask the interviewers questions. And I always say to students, revise, and in the interview, be yourself. If you get a question that you don't understand, immediately say, I'm really sorry, I don't understand the question. If you're asked to talk about something that you've not covered in your syllabus, say so straight away. If you're torn between two possible routes forward and you can't decide, say, I can see the pros and cons of both of these approaches. Here they are, but I'm not unsure which track to take. And then that gives the opportunity for the interviewer to maybe again give you a little bit more information to help you make progress. How do people do at interview? They do well. So this data set, which dates back to 2015, but remains very current in terms of its validity, looks at interview scores obtained in 1,500 different Cambridge interviews in that year, 2015. And it shows you the marks out of 10 that students got. And believe me that in our assessments, a mark of 6 out of 10 is a good score. Anything above 6 is starts to be very good, borderline excellent. 8 and above, very, very good indeed. And you can see by looking at this histogram that of the people interviewed, 75% of them scored scores of 6 and above. So people do well at interview. But this also helps explain why it is that we can't base our judgments just on interview. Interviews are not actually a desperately reliable selection tool. And one of the reasons is that if you look at that range of scores 6, 7, 8, and that's 2/3 of the interviewees scoring those scores. While an interview is better than a 6 at interview, we know from our own research that people who get 8s at interview aren't actually any likelier to do well in Cambridge than people who get 6s. They're all likelier to do well than people who get 5s and below, and they're a little bit less likely to do well than people who get 9s and 10s. But 6, 7, and 8 is all the same, and so in a way, the interviews don't provide us with enough granularity, enough traction to be able simply to select on interview. We just took the people with 9s and 10s, we'd only fill half of our places. And then you're into that kind of rather uncertain upper middle ground where the interviews are perfectly good, but they're not decisive. So that's why we bring lots of information back in when we make our final decisions. And we do our best to make a systematic, scientific, fair-minded decision that weighs all of the factors that we have a sight on together. Finally, where does it go wrong? this is the flip side of everything we've said, really. Students come a cropper in the process because they apply for the wrong subject. And that's usually about mum and dad, because they haven't really worked hard enough in exams, and we have concerns about their record. And if they've got a weaker record than you expected because they were ill, you'll tell us that through your reference, and we will place their results in that context. Sometimes people perform poorly in the process because they're badly organised, they don't revise, they miss deadlines, and there is no way back from that. A lack of wider exploration, usually first evidenced by a UCAS personal statement, often also comes through at interview, where students who are less well prepared can have relatively insecure subject knowledge. They don't know the stuff that they ought really to know. They've been taught it. They should have mastered it by now. And then some students struggle with thinking things through in a rational and logical way, or they make assertions that aren't underpinned by evidence or logical argument. And sometimes they're unwilling to rethink ideas in the face of contrary evidence. They lack intellectual flexibility. But as you saw from the interview scores I showed you a minute or two, actually most people do well at interview, and most people's applications are strong applications. When we make our decisions, we have to make extremely difficult ones. We can't take all of the good people, but we are hopeful that most of the time we take most of the really good people. And schools generally tell us that they think we do, which is a massive relief, but of course we know that we will make mistakes. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and we're going to jump over to questions for the final 20 minutes or so of this session. So Elsie, what have we got?
We have a great question from Chris. Sorry, that was a tongue twister for me this evening. We've got one about extracurricular activities. If they have that super curricular angle. So the example that Chris has given is a student really interested in engineering, particularly robotics, and they've been part of a project building a robot for a competition. Would that be considered helpful?
Right.
Yes. So sometimes we talk extracurricular activities, but there is that overlap, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. So, I mean, I would say that in a way, it's not really an extracurricular, it's a supercurricular. So somebody building a robot who's applying for music, it's an extracurricular. Building a robot applying for engineering, it's a supercurricular. Likewise, you know, you're brilliant at the cello, that's an extracurricular for biology and a supercurricular for music. Excellent question. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, really good. And I think that what we want to see is how they consolidated what they found from that. Just as Richard was saying, the reflections, making it about their personal experiences. You know, where did they go from next? What did that make them read an article in a different way, think about their revision of their topics in a different way? You know, where do they go? We want to see that sort of journey.
And then do everyone, I mean, maybe I didn't stress this enough earlier, do encourage them to go with what they're interested in when they're doing their exploration. So sometimes people will ask me, you know, should our students be exploring widely? Should they be focusing on something more concentrated and diving deeper? And I would say that they should do whatever feels right for them. So the thing that you can do as teachers to help is giving them a head start, you know, giving them an embarkation point for exploration. You know, if they're really interested in English literature, and one of their set texts is, I don't know, The Mayor of Casterbridge by Thomas Hardy, and they're of a mind to read other novels by Thomas Hardy, it would probably be helpful for their English teacher to say to them, well, actually, let's think about the novels that are most directly comparable with The Mayor of Casterbridge. So maybe not Under the Greenwood Tree, but Tessa the D'Urbervilles, perhaps Jude the Obscure. These are going to be, you know, a more natural fit. But maybe you should read Far from the Madding Crowd as well, because that has quite a different feel. It's much less bleak. In a way, it's a more optimistic text. What do you think about that? Does it work better? Does it work less well? Do you like it more? Do you like it less? So it's kind of giving them that starting point, but then letting them go, you know, the places that they want to go, and then encouraging them when they write their personal statement, particularly in the arts and humanities where this matters most, to talk about why they liked the things that they liked, how they explored the things that they explored. Mathematics, I said earlier, in maths, personal statement is almost always completely irrelevant because, I mean, maths is great. You know, what are we looking for for entry in mathematics? We're looking for people who are really good at maths. How do we find that out? We see what you say about how good they are at maths, and then we do maths with them. That's it. We don't really need to do anything else. And in a way, it's a pure version of what we do in every single subject, which is to say, are they really into it, and can they do it? So the exploration is really helpful for giving us material in the arts and humanities, but even in the sciences, if it gives the student more depth, better knowledge, it's going to come naturally through the interview, irrespective almost of the problems that they get asked, because there'll just be somebody who gets the fundamentals, who, faced by a physics problem, thinks like a physicist, and faced by a physics problem, can do the maths that a physicist needs to be able to do. So I think we've got another question, Elsie.
Yes, we do. The question is, would you have any advice or tips for students applying to HSPS? Because this is a particular Cambridge course, perhaps we can.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So Cambridge has got a couple of courses, Natural Sciences and HSPS, which are essentially joint honours courses under a single label. In the case of natural sciences, you can do all of natural sciences, and you don't have to specialize in a particular track from the beginning. You start off broad, and then you specialize as you go through. And HSPS is kind of the social sciences version of natural sciences. So it includes politics and sociology and aspects of anthropology, and some aspects of psychology as well, actually. Most of the people who are HSPS candidates are either politics or sociology, sometimes a bit of both, but you'd be surprised the number of people who get really interested in anthropology once they start on the course. Not that many people are interested in anthropology before they begin HSPS, but it's because it's something that doesn't really have a profile in popular consciousness, or at least not much, though it might have a slightly higher profile now that Dexter Mayhew in one day did it. So that will mean that we won't be able to use this video for very long, else it'll be hideously dated by a reference to contemporary culture. But otherwise, HSPS, I mean, it's a great course. Most candidates politics, a large minority sociology, and how to explore it, read. The politics side of it is much more about political ideas and international relations than it is about political systems. So it's quite different from politics A level. It's a bit more in a way like either history or philosophy, I would say, in terms of content. And if I were encouraging students to be reading about political ideas, I would suggest that very good places to start for HSPS would be On Liberty by John Stuart Mill, or Rousseau's The Social Contract. Texts that are challenging but are accessible, particularly on liberty. And I, really hope that virtually every young person would read On Liberty and would be inspired by the importance of freedom of thought and freedom of action. But, that's a personal thing.
Thanks, Richard. We've had a follow-up question about the length of the personal statement and also the length of the academic reference. So just to answer quickly about personal statements, the UCAS set the character limits, 4,000 characters, about a side of A4, just under, I think, really.
Yeah.
And we'd like to see the majority of that to be, we usually say sort of an 80-20 if we're giving sort of a general guidance, with the 80 being that these mini research paragraphs, essentially, these personal statement, super curricular content, and with the 20 is for additional skills. Am I right in saying that, Richard? In sort of
I mean, remember that when you submit a UCAS application, it goes to all of the UK universities to which the student is applying, and there are other universities that look for, in inverted commas, wider contribution, and they're quite often interested in extracurriculars. So it's a good idea to put extracurriculars in maybe in the last 20% of the personal statement. We won't really place an emphasis upon it in Cambridge, but other universities might. What if your student doesn't have any extracurricular activities because all they do is computing and they're applying for computing? No problem. They'll look like lots of other computing candidates, and when they get to university, they'll be among friends. So again, just go with the real person.
Yeah. And the second half of this question then about the academic references. So I think because we might want to talk about the different sections at this point, because I think total is 4,000 characters, but the recommended character lengths for each section, I've got the webpage up here that I'll share in the follow-up email tomorrow. But essentially we've got the 3 sections, and for the section 3, which is probably one of the most important parts.
That's the most important for us. That's where the academic information is.
Yeah, that would be a minimum of 2,000 characters for that section. And then, of course, for each reference, there's going to be...
So you mean a maximum of 2,000 characters, Elsie?
It says here a minimum of 2,000 characters for that third section.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. Well, there you go. That's a surprise to me that there is a minimum of 2,000 characters for that third section. I think
Yeah.
we might need to have a word with UCAS about that. That's certainly not something that we would require personally. I mean, I've actually found references in the last year, some of them bullet pointed, really good because they just nail that metrical information. You know, Genevieve is top 3 in history, you know, and then a bit about what she does in history. You know, so it doesn't need to be the kind of really carefully honed piece of descriptive writing that it used to be in the old days. It can be quite to the point now, and it's going to work for us perfectly well.
Yeah, I will share that that web page, but I'll follow up if anyone has any queries about that. But yeah, there's quite a lot of information about where each bit of information would go for that in terms of
one question.
Information.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Sorry, no.
One question I've quite often had from teachers recently has been, what if the student who I'm writing the reference for is not in the top, you know, handful of students? They're not in the top X%. And I've said, well, generally speaking, I would say if they're in the top 50%, it's worth putting that in because that's still really useful information for us to see. And remember, in some of our, for some of our subjects, you know, we've only got you know, two applicants per place. So it's maybe not quite as competitive for entry as you might think. And I think that once somebody is in the top 25% of the field, you should definitely put that information in if you've got it, you know, metrically explicable. If they're in the bottom half of your ability and commitment range in your institution, then it's probably best, I think, to talk in broader terms about their interest in the subject and their commitment in lessons and that kind of thing. And maybe not say, you know, David was ranked 35 out of 43 in the end of year examinations. I mean, that's obviously not going to look brilliant. Best just to say, you know, he's very committed to the subject and, you know, always does his best, that kind of thing.
I can't see any further questions in the Q&A box or the chat box.
Is there anything that I've not mentioned, Elsie, that you think perhaps I should have mentioned? Or anything that you'd mention?
I think maybe just stressing about course choice again. So I've been at the Manchester UCAS fairs recently, so I was saying this many times on each of those days, and how important it is for students to really get this right and not, I think, sometimes have quite a blinkered approach and think, like, I'm sort of dead set on this one course. And sort of keep their options open, keep exploring related courses. And I think this goes broadly for all UCAS choices as well, not just for our subjects. But yeah, perhaps we could talk a little bit about that. Oh, we've had a question actually.
Oh, we have got a question. Let's deal with the question.
Are there other universities that have the supervision program, the tutorial program that you're aware of, where if students are applying to Cambridge, they might also be looking at another similar university? So yes, I don't think we've mentioned Oxford, have we yet?
We haven't yet, but listen, everyone, everything I've said about Cambridge is applicable to Oxford. They're basically the same university in different places. So there are some courses that are different. Oxford don't have natural sciences, for example, or HSPS. They have individual science subjects and they have PPE, politics, philosophy, and economics, as an alternative to HPS in a way. So there are some differences, but in terms of the collegiate structure, the way that they teach, our supervisions of their tutorials, it's the same thing, very small group teaching. So Oxford is the only university in the UK that provides that really intensive small group teaching. Durham is also a collegiate university, and I think the experience of living in your college and having a kind of interdisciplinary community of which you're part is something that people in Durham experience quite vividly as well. And I think on a subject by subject basis, you know, in every case, we would say that there are other UK universities that we think are really exceptionally strong. UK higher education in general really punches above its weight in international terms. I think in lots of the big, you know, the mainstream subjects, there are 30 or more UK universities that by international standards are really, really good. And I would say that in most of our subjects, I could point to a handful of other universities in the UK where I think essentially the offering is as good as ours. It might not involve supervision or tutorials, but we would say it's a very, very good course, very well taught by very good people. Maybe a little bit different in terms of emphasis and structure, but still really sound. Sometimes when we're, you know, talking to students, they will they will put us on the spot and they will say, you know, where would you recommend that I apply in addition to Cambridge? And, you know, sometimes if I'm with a colleague from Oxford or a colleague in a different subject, we'll swap notes between us about, you know, which universities we think are really good. But there are always universities where we're saying, well, I think they might be better than us, perhaps. You know, I mean, a good example would be Imperial for engineering. I mean, not necessarily saying it's better than Cambridge or Oxford, but it's certainly extremely good, at least as good. You know, I think about in my subject history, Oxford's brilliant, Cambridge is really good, but there's so many good history universities, and some that you might not immediately think of. Lancaster at the moment, I think, is really good for history. St Andrews, you probably would think of St Andrews, and of course it's a very, you know, small town. It's a very particular bit of the UK, but, you know, really, really good. And we could say this about so many subjects. Any more questions, Elsie?
No, none that I can see that have come in.
Okay. And what we were going to talk about something before another question popped up, weren't we? I'm trying to remember what it was.
I was just sort of musing about course choice.
Oh yeah. So I know what I was going to say, which is that this stage, so we're in March, in advance of applications being due in October. It's quite normal for students to be agonizing even between different subjects. So there will be a minority of students who know which university subject they're going to apply for. But I would say that it's more normal at this point for people still to be trying to decide. And one of the great things about getting them to do supercurricular exploration is that it will help finalize that decision. You know, the stuff that they really find engaging and interesting, that they find that they can do and understand, you know, that will give them that feel for the right subject. Other useful things to do: having a look in detail at university websites, looking at course content as the course unfolds, thinking about what they're good at as well as what they like, but also watching online lectures and participating perhaps in MOOCs. But I think you get a very strong sense from online lectures. And the only caveat that I would put around all of that, around exploration, is that you know, your students are going to be very bright people. Not everything that they read or watch will be compelling. And if they find that they're reacting to some things in a negative way, that can almost be as positive an indication as reacting in a positive way. In other words, that there is something about what they're reading or what they're hearing which is really enervating them, and that probably implies that they're genuinely interested in the subject. The other possibility, of course, is that the lecture's just not very good, or the book's not very good, and that does happen too.
For me, it was a lot of sweeping generalizations. I remember talking about how annoying they were in my personal statement. That was ages ago, but yeah, I remember pushing back on a few texts. We've had more questions come in, Richard, so let me just
far away. Yeah, let's do it.
So which other universities are strong for Chinese? This was a question.
Oh, that's a really good question. So Oxford, I would say, and beyond that, I must confess that I don't really know. It's a subject area on which I'm by no means expert. But I think the thing to watch out for is, what I can say is that there are universities, and I think Sheffield would be a good example, where you can combine Chinese with other subjects with a great deal of flexibility in a way that you can't in Cambridge. And it's worth checking whether a course is language focused or culture focused, or both. And the ideal would be both, I would say.
Absolutely. We've had a couple of questions on sort of statistics and proportions of students.
Yes.
So what percentage of students change their subject once they're here?
Once they've arrived? Really good question. So not very many. I would say it's less than 5%. And a major reason for that is, firstly, that most of them get it right in the first time. They think about it really hard and they do get it right. And secondly, I think our admissions process, particularly the interview element, it's quite good at flushing out whether somebody might not actually be really that committed to the subject. So not that many people want to change subjects. And of the people who want to change subjects, we say yes to maybe about half. And why would we say no? Because we look at their academic profile and we look at the thing that they want to change into, and we think this isn't a brilliant fit. So you might think that you want to move from HSPS into economics, but you don't have the mathematical ability to be able to cope in economics. So we're not going to say yes to that.
And there is actual movement between maths and natural sciences. Of course, that's built into the
There
way
can be,
cycle
yeah.
But what we're talking about
be.
is, switching almost disciplines. But yeah, that's
So the most common moves I would say would be within the sciences, so not in natural sciences, because it's a kind of multiple science course, but people moving from mathematics into computing, or from computing into natural sciences, or from engineering into natural sciences. Those things are a little bit more common. And then we do get people who are struggling in a subject with technical content, moving into a parallel subject with a bit less technical content. So I've known people, for example, move from classics into history because they're struggling with the language element in classics. And in history, they can do lots of ancient history, but they're not bedeviled by the struggle with language in the same way.
If we can move to a few other questions as well that have come in. What percentage of admitted students complete their course? That's another question.
What percentage? 99.5%. So it's extremely high. And who doesn't complete? People who are really ill, where it can't be fixed, in a nutshell.
Because of that strong collegiate within the college.
Yeah, very strong support, very strong welfare support, very good early warning on things going wrong, because people are being taught in small groups every week. As soon as things start to go wrong, we know, because they stop showing up, or the work falls behind, or they look really miserable, we flushing out really fast. So what percentage of students intermit? It's a bit higher. People who have to take a year out, maybe, I would say it's probably somewhere in the region of 3%, but almost all of those students come back and successfully complete.
Thank you, Richard. We've had a question about funding and scholarships. What I will do is in the follow-up email send both examples of the scholarships and financial support that we have at St John's, but also the main university pages for the Cambridge Bursary Scheme as well. But just in the interest of time, I thought I'll just send the webpage in lieu of discussing it now. There's been another question come in about, for humanities courses, is a high degree of mathematics necessary? My first thought is a lot of really great mathematicians make excellent lawyers. I think we've seen that often happens, maybe also for music as well, for these transferable skills. But what would you say to that, Richard?
That's a really good question. So it's a kind of two-part answer. So the first answer is no, with the exception of economics. So for economics, you really do need to be good at maths in Cambridge, really good to cope with the economics course here. For other arts and humanities subjects, you don't need to be a really strong mathematician. That said, the second part of the answer is, however, people who are really good at maths often do really well on these courses, not because you need maths content, but because people who are really good at maths are often really logical, and that logical ability works well everywhere. So we looked at this one time. We got a research unit in Cambridge that looks at the relationship between indicators of admission and outcomes in degree. And we discovered that of all of the subjects that students sit at the A-level stage, whether it's A-level or another subject, the subject that had the best correlations with good outcomes in Cambridge was mathematics in every single course that we offer. So the best indicator of somebody being likely to do really well in English literature is that they've done really well in mathematics. The reality is that the vast majority of people reading English haven't done mathematics at all. But if they have done mathematics and they've done really well in it, they tend to do really well at university. So it's a kind of magic subject, mathematics.
Very interesting. That's a good thing.
It's not what you'd expect, is it? But it is. Yeah. It's true.
Anecdotally, it rings true for me now. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Excellent. I think we will draw the session to a close, but thank you so much, Richard, for such a thorough.
No, it's a great pleasure. No, thank you. And Elsie, you always host so well and give such good answers yourself. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for coming. I really appreciate your time, and I hope it was useful. And I think we've recorded, haven't we, Elsie? So we'll stick it up on the internet.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank
you.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye.
Bye.